There are fates in the Imperium worse than death, and most of them begin the same way. A scream cut short inside a voidship corridor. A Gellar Field shuddering like a failing heartbeat. A navigator clawing at their third eye as something ancient presses back from the other side of reality. The Imperium teaches its people that the warp is a place you pass through, a storm to be endured on the way to something solid and real. But that is a lie born of necessity. The truth is far more intimate and far more cruel. The warp does not kill you. It takes you apart, piece by piece, and decides what you will become when it is finished. Every jump through the Immaterium leaves a mark. Most are subtle, buried beneath faith and routine. Some are not. And a very small number are so profound that the person who emerges is no longer the one who entered at all. If you have ever wondered why veterans of warp travel never quite meet your eyes, why some survivors refuse to speak of what they saw even under interrogation, or why the Imperium burns entire crews without trial after certain voyages, then you are already closer to the truth than most citizens will ever be allowed to stand. If you want more journeys into the darkest mechanisms of the Imperium, stories that treat Warhammer 40,000 not as spectacle but as lived horror, consider liking this transmission, sharing it with others who walk these shadows, and subscribing so you do not miss what waits beyond the next jump. The void remembers those who return. The first sign is never the alarms. It is never the screaming. It is the silence that arrives just before both. On the lower decks of the Imperial transport Vigilant Oath, a deckhand named Marius feels it as a pause in the rhythm of his own breathing, a fraction of a second where his lungs forget what comes next. Around him, the ship settles into its jump posture with the tired groan of overworked metal, bulkheads flexing as they always do. Incense burners swing gently from chains bolted into the ceiling, spilling thin coils of bitter smoke that cling to the recycled air. The litany of safe passage echoes down the corridor, recited by a vox grill mounted above the hatch, the words worn smooth by centuries of repetition. Marius mouths the prayer without thinking. He has done this 14 times before. 14 warp transits, 14 survivals. Statistically, he knows what that means. Practically, he tells himself it means nothing at all. The Gellar Field comes online with a vibration you feel more than hear. A low, bone-deep hum that rattles teeth and makes the deck plates itch beneath your boots. Veterans say you get used to it. They are lying, or they have forgotten what used to feel normal. As the field stabilizes, the stars outside the armored viewports smear into pale lines and then vanish entirely, replaced by nothing at all. Not darkness. Absence. The moment stretches, suspended between heartbeats, and the Vigilant Oath is no longer anywhere that can be named. In that instant, before the Immaterium fully closes around them, Marius tastes copper on his tongue and thinks of his mother's voice calling his name from a place that no longer exists. Time inside the warp does not behave. That is the official phrasing, lifted straight from a data slate he once glimpsed while delivering supplies to a junior adept. Unofficially, time breaks. Minutes pool and congeal. Hours slip sideways. The ship's chronometers continue their steady march, but the human mind refuses to follow them. On the first watch, Marius finds himself staring at a lumen strip, convinced it has been flickering for far too long. When he looks away and then back, it has not changed at all. His heart stutters. He swallows and tells himself this is normal. Everyone feels disoriented during the initial phase of translation. The manuals say so. The ecclesiarchy says so. The emperor protects. The corridors feel narrower. Not physically, not in any way a surveyor's tool could measure, but perceptually, as if the air itself has thickened. Conversations become strained, voices sounding slightly wrong, their echoes arriving a half-beat late. An armsman laughs at a joke Marius does not hear, the sound sharp and brittle, like glass tapped with a knife. Somewhere deep in the ship, a servitor emits a shrill burst of binary cant and then falls silent. No one investigates. Malfunctions happen during warp travel. This is another truth repeated often enough to become comforting. The warp is hostile, but the Gellar Field holds. As long as it holds, the ship is safe. Marius tells himself he believes this as he moves through the mess, gripping his tin mug with hands that have begun to tremble. The recaf tastes burnt and thin, but worse than that, it tastes unfamiliar, as if something essential has been stripped away. Across from him, a woman he vaguely recognizes from cargo tally duty stares into her own cup, lips moving in a prayer too quiet to hear. Her eyes are red-rimmed, unfocused. When she looks up, their gazes meet, and for a moment Marius feels a jolt of panic so sharp it steals his breath. He has the irrational certainty that she is seeing something behind him, something close enough to lean over his shoulder. He does not turn. He smiles stiffly and looks back down at his drink. The warp presses. That is the sensation navigators and astropaths struggle to describe to those without the gift or the curse to perceive it directly. It is not pressure like water or air, but insistence. A sense that reality is being asked a question it does not want to answer. Even shielded by the Gellar Field, the human mind feels the weight of that question. Old memories surface without invitation. Regrets replay with cruel clarity. Marius thinks of the man he left bleeding on a loading dock years ago after a fight over rations, a face he has tried not to remember. He smells the rust and promethium of that day as vividly as if it were happening again. His heart pounds. The ship hums. The prayer continues to cycle through the Vox grill, its cadence unchanged. Indifferent to the way something unseen has begun to pick through the contents of his mind. This is the first unmaking, though no one aboard would use that word. It is subtle, deniable, easily dismissed as stress. The warp does not need claws or fangs to begin its work. It only needs proximity. A moment between heartbeats. A fraction of time where the rules loosen just enough for something ancient to notice that a thinking, feeling soul is passing through its domain. The Vigilant Oath sails on, wrapped in its flickering shield of faith and machinery, and deep within its hull, Marius feels a quiet, terrible certainty settle into his bones. Something has become aware of him. Something patient.sleep becomes a negotiation rather than a refuge. When Marius finally lies down in his narrow bunk, the metal still warm from the previous shift's occupant, he closes his eyes with the careful deliberation of someone stepping onto uncertain ground. The hum of the Gellar Field seeps through the walls, no longer a background sensation but a presence that fills his skull. Each vibration carries a faint distortion, as if the sound is being bent around something vast just out of reach. He recites the litany of dreams under his breath, the words stumbling when his tongue feels suddenly too thick for his mouth. Around him, the compartment settles into a strained quiet, broken only by shallow breathing and the distant creak of the ship's frame. His dreams do not begin as nightmares. That comes later. At first, they are ordinary, even comforting. A sunlit hab corridor from his childhood. The smell of boiled grain and machine oil. His mother's hands, rough but warm, smoothing his hair. The familiarity is so precise it hurts. Then, without warning, the details begin to drift. The corridor stretches impossibly long. The light bends at strange angles, pooling in corners where shadows should not exist. His mother's face blurs, her features smearing like wet paint, and when she speaks, her voice is layered, multiple tones overlapping in a way that makes his teeth ache. She calls his name, but the syllables are wrong, elongated, as if they are being tasted by something that does not understand them. Marius wakes with a gasp. Lungs burning, fingers clawing at the thin blanket as though it might anchor him to something solid. Sweat chills his skin. The compartment is unchanged, the same rust-streaked bulkheads, the same faint lumen glow. And yet, the sense of intrusion lingers, a residue he cannot shake. He sits up and notices, with a creeping unease, that he cannot immediately remember how long he has been asleep. Minutes? Hours? The chronometer on the wall insists on a neat, comforting answer, but it feels like a lie told too smoothly to be trusted. Others begin to show signs as well. On the next shift, an armsman snaps at a routine order, his temper flaring with a violence that surprises even him. A pair of adepts argue over a cargo manifest, their voices rising until one of them begins to sob without warning, clutching her data slate as though it has betrayed her. A servitor in the aft corridor starts repeating a single phrase in broken Low Gothic, words that do not match any known command string. When a tech priest arrives to silence it, he does so without comment, mechadendrites moving with practiced efficiency. No incident report is filed. Acknowledging patterns is dangerous during warp transit. Marius finds himself listening more closely to the sounds of the ship, cataloging them without intending to. The hiss of vents. The clank of distant machinery. Beneath it all, something else, too low and too irregular to be mechanical. A murmur, almost. He tells himself it is the echo of the Gellar Field, harmonics interacting in unpredictable ways. He tells himself many things. Faith, after all, is as much about what you refuse to consider as what you accept. Still, when the murmur seems to shape itself around his thoughts, growing louder when his fear spikes, he feels a chill that has nothing to do with recycled air. The warp's attention is not uniform. This becomes clear as days blur together in a haze of strained routine. Some crew members move through their duties untouched, laughing, complaining, clinging to normalcy with desperate energy. Others withdraw, eyes hollow, hands shaking as if suffering from a sickness no Medicaid can diagnose. Marius watches a young ratings clerk freeze mid-task, her gaze fixed on something only she can see. When he touches her shoulder, she screams, a raw animal sound that echoes down the corridor. She is escorted away by armsmen, her protest dissolving into incoherent prayers. Later, he hears she has been confined to a sanctified chamber near the chapel for her own safety and that of the crew. The implication hangs heavy and unspoken. What the Imperium rarely articulates is that the warp does not lash out blindly. It is not a storm striking at random. It observes. It tests. It learns the contours of a mind the way a craftsman learns the grain of wood, pressing gently at first, noting where resistance is strongest and where it yields. Marius senses this not as a coherent thought, but as a growing intuition, a feeling that his fears are being rearranged, prioritized, made more accessible. The memory of the man he left bleeding surfaces again and again, sharper each time, accompanied by a sensation like approval. The murmur deepens. His dreams grow more vivid, less forgiving. By the time the Vigilant Oath has been in the warp long enough for the crew to stop counting days, the first stage of the unmaking is complete. No horns blare. No demons tear through reality. The ship continues on its plotted course, chronometers ticking faithfully onward. Yet something fundamental has shifted. The warp has learned names, faces, weaknesses. It has begun to shape its questions with care. And Marius, standing alone in a narrow corridor, feels the certainty return, heavier now, impossible to ignore. Whatever noticed him in that moment between heartbeats has not lost interest. It is simply waiting for the field to thin, for the next compromise to be made. The waiting does not feel long. The hum changes before anyone admits it has. Not in pitch, not in volume, but in texture, as though the sound has acquired edges where it once flowed smoothly. Marius notices it while hauling a crate through a service passage that smells of old oil and ozone. The vibration beneath his boots stutters, just once, so brief it could be dismissed as imagination. He freezes anyway, muscles locked, breath held. Around him, the ship carries on, indifferent. The Gellar Field has not failed. No alarms scream. No red lumen strips flare to life. And yet, in that infinitesimal hitch, something fundamental slips. For a heartbeat that stretches too long, Marius is aware of depth. Not the physical depth of deck stacked beneath his feet, but a vertiginous sense of inward distance, as if his thoughts have dropped into a well with no visible bottom. Images crowd his mind, not hallucinations in the crude sense, but impressions layered over reality like reflections on dark glass. He smells rot beneath the machine oil. He hears a chorus of whispers braided so tightly together that no single voice can be separated from the rest. His name threads through them, pronounced with intimate familiarity, tested for fit. Then it passes. The vibration steadies. The world snaps back into its proper proportions. And Marius finds himself leaning against the bulkhead, heart hammering, palms slick with sweat. He waits for the scream that does not come. He waits for the alarms. Nothing happens. Down the corridor, another deckhand mutters a joke about jump jitters and keeps walking. The Imperium does not pause for private revelations. That is when Marius understands, with a clarity that makes him feel faint, that the danger was never the moment of exposure everyone fears. It was not the sudden tearing of reality or the monstrous incursion told in cautionary sermons. It was this. The almost. The brush of something vast and curious against the fragile architecture of a human mind, leaving it intact enough to function, altered enough to never be the same. The warp has not wounded him. It has adjusted him, the way pressure shapes metal without cracking it. When the Vigilant Oath finally claws its way back into real space, the transition is violent and abrupt. Stars slam back into existence. The hum of the Gellar Field dies away, leaving an absence that feels like sudden deafness. Some crew members cheer. Others collapse where they stand, weeping with relief. Marius grips a handrail and forces himself to breathe, waiting for the lingering sense of presence to fade. It does not. Even bathed once more in the cold certainty of real space, he feels altered, as if the warp has etched a shallow groove into his soul that will never fully smooth over. He will file no report. He will pass every inspection. The Medicae will find nothing wrong. Officially, the voyage will be logged as successful, the crew intact, the ship blessed by the Emperor's protection. And in every measurable way that matters to the Imperium, that assessment will be correct. The truth is smaller and far more dangerous. Marius has crossed the Immaterium and returned alive. Something else has crossed with him, not as a passenger or a parasite, but as a change in how he remembers himself. The unmaking has begun, quietly, efficiently. Without spectacle and somewhere beyond the thin skin of reality. The warp waits to see what shape he will take next. The Imperium insists that survival is proof enough of purity. If a ship emerges from the warp intact, if its crew can still recite their names and swear loyalty to the throne, then whatever happened in the void is considered resolved. Marius learns how thin that logic is within days of the Vigilant Oath resuming its duties. Real space feels sharper than he remembers. Sounds arrive with a painful clarity, every clang of metal echoing too long in his skull. Smells linger. Promethium fumes cling to the back of his throat, and the recycled air tastes stale in a way that borders on obscene. It is as if his senses have been tuned too tightly. Forced into an attentiveness they cannot relax from. At first, he welcomes the distraction. Work is easier when you can focus on it completely, when every movement feels precise. His hands seem steadier. His reaction's quicker. He anticipates orders before they are spoken, turning at the exact moment a superior opens their mouth. A petty officer remarks on his efficiency with a grunt of approval. Marius feels a flicker of pride, followed immediately by a spike of unease that leaves his stomach hollow. The sensation of being watched has not faded. It has changed. Where once it felt distant and impersonal, now it carries a sense of expectation, like an eye held just out of sight, waiting for him to perform. Sleep brings no relief. The dreams return, but they no longer masquerade as comfort. They arrive vivid and purposeful, scenes arranged with deliberate care. He dreams of the man from the loading dock again, the one he left bleeding, but this time the setting is wrong. The deck beneath them ripples like liquid metal. The air hums with the same textured vibration as the Gellar Field, though he knows, somehow, that no field protects him here. The man looks up and smiles, teeth too white, eyes reflecting colors that do not exist in real space. When he speaks, his voice is calm, almost kind, and it asks Marius questions he does not remember answering. When Marius wakes, his mouth tastes of ash, and he cannot shake the certainty that something has learned from the exchange. Others aboard the Vigilant Oath are not so fortunate. The armsman who laughed too sharply during the voyage now flinches at sudden movement, his hand never far from his weapon. A ratings clerk is found in the chapel, fingers bleeding from carving the imperial aquila into the deck plating over and over again, her lips moving in frantic prayer. The ship's astropath, a gaunt figure wrapped in wards and ritual scars, withdraws from communal spaces entirely, communicating only through curt, heavily filtered transmissions. Rumors spread in the half-whispered way they always do, threaded through mess halls and maintenance corridors. The warp clings. The warp marks. The warp remembers. What Marius begins to understand, slowly and against his will, is that the Immaterium does not merely intrude. It invites. The fear that once spiked and receded now settles into a constant low ache. A background hum that mirrors the memory of the Gellar Field. When he is angry, the world seems to sharpen further, colors deepening, sounds clarifying until they border on painful. When he feels guilt, memories surface with surgical precision, dragging him back through every moment he would rather forget. And beneath it all is a sense of encouragement, subtle but persistent, as though something is rewarding these emotional extremes, nudging him toward them. The Imperium has words for this, though they are rarely spoken outside sanctioned instruction. Exposure, taint, deviation. They imply corruption, a moral failing, a slide towards something monstrous. But what Marius feels does not align with those simple condemnations. It feels like hunger. Not his own, exactly, but something layered over his thoughts. Something that sharpens when he experiences fear, regret, or rage. When a junior deckhand drops a crate and nearly loses a foot, Marius feels a surge of emotion so intense it makes his vision blur. For a breathless instant, the panic in the air feels nourishing, like warmth spreading through his chest. The realization horrifies him. The sensation does not fade. He begins to understand why veterans of warp travel never quite meet your eyes. They are not hiding madness or secret allegiance. They are guarding themselves, rationing their reactions, aware on some instinctive level that too much emotion feeds something they cannot see. The warp does not need to break you to use you. It only needs you to feel, deeply and often, until those feelings become pathways it can follow. Marius senses those pathways forming within himself, thin at first, then more defined. Like grooves worn into stone by persistent water. One night, as the Vigilant Oath drifts between assignments, he pauses in an empty corridor and presses his forehead against the cool metal of the bulkhead. He whispers a prayer he has not spoken since childhood, not because he expects an answer, but because the silence feels dangerous. For a moment, there is nothing. Then, faintly, impossibly, he feels a sense of recognition ripple through him as though the act itself has been noted. The hunger stirs, patient and pleased. This is the second stage of the unmaking. The warp no longer brushes against the soul in passing. It begins to know it by shape and texture. It learns which emotions open doors and which seal them shut. And once it knows your name, it never forgets it. The first time Marius hears it in waking hours, he thinks it is a Vox fault. The Vigilant Oath is old. Its corridor is threaded with cabling that has been patched and repatched by generations of tech adepts, its Vox grills prone to static and ghost echoes when the reactor load shifts. He is alone in a storage bay, checking seals on ration crates, when the whisper slides through the air like a draft. It does not come from the speakers. It comes from the space between his thoughts, a sound too close to be external and too distinct to be imagined. Marius. It is not spoken with menace. That would be easier to endure. It is spoken with familiarity, the way someone might say your name when they have been waiting a long time to use it. His spine tightens. He turns, scanning the bay, the stacked crates, the shadowed corners where the lumen strips don't quite reach. Nothing moves. Nothing breathes. Yet the sense of presence swells, pressing gently, like a hand laid on the back of his neck. He leaves the bay quickly, forcing his steps to remain measured. Panic is dangerous. Panic is food. This thought comes unbidden, and when it does, he feels the same sick warmth in his chest he felt during the deckhand's accident. The hunger stirs in approval. He bites down hard on the inside of his cheek until he tastes blood, grounding himself in the sharp reality of pain. It helps, but only slightly. The warp has not followed him physically into real space. It has left an echo in him, a resonance that can be struck at will. He begins to notice patterns. When he keeps his emotions flat, when he works silently, eats without complaint, speaks only when spoken to, the whispers fade into the background. When he allows himself to feel, truly feel, they return. Anger makes them sharper. Fear makes them multiply. Guilt makes them intimate. And worst of all, there is a moment after each surge when something in him settles. Satisfied, as though fed, he tries prayer. In the chapel, beneath flickering candles and the looming icon of the Imperial Aquila, he kneels and recites litanies until his throat aches. The incense is thicker here, sweet and cloying, masking the underlying stench of sweat and old metal. Around him, other crew members murmur their own pleas, faces drawn tight with exhaustion. For a short time, Marius feels steadier. The ritual gives shape to his thoughts, boundaries he can press against. But when he lowers his head, eyes closed, he feels the whisper again, curling around the words of his prayer like smoke. Not an answer. Not a rebuttal. An accompaniment. It is then that he realizes something that chills him more than any demon tale he heard as a child. The warp is not always opposed to faith. It can wear faith the way a man wears a cloak. It can twist devotion into a door. He thinks of the ratings clerk carving the Imperial Aquila into the deck plates, bleeding for the symbol, and wonders, sick with dread, whether she is worshipping the Emperor or simply feeding the thing that has learned how to reward her fervor. The ship's officers begin to react. Not openly. The Imperium does not encourage panic, but it does encourage control. Armsmen double their patrols. Certain corridors are declared off-limits under the excuse of maintenance. The chapel gains additional wards inscribed by a stern-faced priest whose eyes never soften. The tech priests conduct more frequent checks on the Vox systems, muttering binaric prayers as they work. The atmosphere aboard the Vigilant Oath shifts from ordinary tension to something tighter, more brittle. The crew's laughter dies quickly. Conversations become careful, guarded. People begin watching each other with suspicion, as though any sign of instability might be enough to earn a sealed door and a quiet execution. Marius keeps his head down, but the hunger in him grows restless. He feels it when another crew member cries out in his sleep. He feels it when a petty officer strikes a ratings boy for a mistake, and the boy's fear blooms bright in the air like a flare. He feels it when the astropath's presence brushes the ship's Vox systems, a cold psychic pressure that makes his scalp prickle. Each time, something in him leans toward the emotion like a starving man leaning toward heat. The worst moment comes without spectacle. He is in the mess when a tray slips from someone's hands and crashes to the floor, spilling thin stew across boots. It should be nothing. A minor annoyance. But the sudden noise and the sharp spike of embarrassment in the room hit Marius like a physical blow. His vision narrows. The air thickens. For a fraction of a second, he is back in that impossible dream space. The deck rippling, the man from the loading dock smiling. The whisper returns, louder now, threaded with satisfaction. Yes. Marius jerks upright so violently his chair scrapes against the deck plates. Heads turn. The room goes silent. He forces a laugh that sounds wrong even to him, too sharp, too strained. He mutters an apology and leaves before anyone can question him. Behind him, the mess slowly resumes its noise, but he can feel eyes following his back. The ship is learning to fear him. He retreats to a maintenance alcove and presses his hands against the cold metal, breathing in slow counts the way an armsman once taught him. Control the breath, control the heart, control the mind. It is a simple discipline, and it works just enough to keep him from unraveling. Yet even in that fragile calm, he feels the hunger waiting, patient as a predator that knows its prey cannot run forever, because the warp has done more than mark him. It has begun to map him. It knows which emotions weaken him and which strengthen him. It knows the shape of his guilt, the taste of his fear, the precise rhythm of his anger. And now that it has learned his name in the quiet of real space, it no longer needs the Immaterium to reach him. It only needs him to live, to react, to feel. And deep in the ship's core, beyond the sealed sanctums and the praying mouths, the Vigilant Oath receives a new set of orders. A long-haul transit. A required jump through the warp to reach a world whose name is spoken with a flat certainty of logistics. Marius reads the destination on a data slate and feels his stomach drop, because the hunger inside him stirs with sudden, eager recognition as if it has been there before. The Imperium teaches its servants to fear catastrophe because catastrophe is easy to recognize. Sirens, fire, hull breaches. Demons clawing their way through torn reality. What it does not teach is how to recognize the more dangerous failure, the one that arrives without noise or spectacle. The kind that slips past faith and machinery alike, leaving everything apparently intact. When the Vigilant Oath enters the warp for the second time, there are no screams and no violent lurch, only the familiar hum settling into place and the stars dissolving into absence. To the officers on the bridge, the transition is flawless. To Marius, it feels wrong immediately. The hum is back, but it is thinner now, stretched like a wire drawn too tight. He feels it in his teeth, in the joints of his fingers, in the soft place behind his eyes where headaches are born. The hunger inside him responds at once, not with excitement but with something closer to anticipation. He realizes, with a sinking dread, that it recognizes this state. This narrow margin between safety and exposure. The Gellar Field is holding. It is simply not holding as well as it should. Routine fractures faster this time. The first watch passes in strained quiet, the crew subdued, their movements cautious, as if the ship itself might be startled by sudden motion. Marius works alongside men and women who no longer bother pretending they are unaffected. Eyes dart, hands shake. A senior armsman pauses mid-patrol and presses his palm against the wall, whispering a prayer he cannot seem to finish. No one comments. Drawing attention feels dangerous now, like shouting in a room where something is listening for raised voices. The change is not uniform. That is what unsettles Marius most. The ship does not descend into chaos. Instead, it develops pockets of wrongness, subtle and localized. A corridor where sound seems muffled, footsteps swallowed by the deck plates. A storage bay where lumen strips flicker in irregular patterns that make the shadows twist unnaturally. A section of habs where sleepers wake screaming from identical dreams they cannot fully remember. The officers issue calm explanations. Power fluctuations, fatigue, minor warp interference. The Imperium has a phrase for everything, and those phrases are meant to be shields. Marius feels the thinning most clearly in himself. His thoughts no longer feel entirely private. When fear spikes, it echoes. When guilt surfaces, it lingers, examined from angles that are not his own. The whisper does not speak constantly. It does not need to. Its presence is enough, a pressure that reshapes his reactions before he can consciously choose them. He begins to understand that the warp is not waiting for the field to fail completely. It is working within the margin, exploiting every microscopic imperfection, every moment of distraction or doubt. He witnesses the first true consequence during a routine maintenance cycle. A tech adept is recalibrating a junction node when she suddenly stiffens, mechadendrites freezing mid-motion. Her eyes roll back and she begins to laugh, a thin, reedy sound that scrapes along Marius's nerves. For a moment, nothing else happens. Then the laughter stops, cut off as cleanly as if someone had closed a door. She slumps forward, unconscious but breathing. The Medicae later declare it a stress response compounded by warp exposure. She is sedated and removed from duty. No further action is taken, but Marius sees what the reports will not record. In that brief moment of laughter, when the Gellar Field faltered just enough to allow a brush of something vast and amused, the hunger inside him surged so violently it nearly dropped him to his knees. It was not joy. It was recognition. The warp was close enough to touch, and whatever part of him had been reshaped during the last voyage leaned toward it without hesitation. That is when the fear truly takes hold. Not the fear of being attacked or possessed, but the fear of alignment. The fear that if the field thins further, he will not resist. Not because he wants what waits beyond it, but because some altered part of him already understands it. The Imperium warns against corruption as if it is always a struggle, a battle of wills. It does not speak of the quieter danger, the one where resistance erodes until it no longer feels natural. The Gellar Field does not fail. It does something worse. It fluctuates. The fluctuation lasts less than a second. No alarm sound. No lights change. Most of the crew never even notice. But for Marius, that fraction of time stretches into something vast and terrible. Reality peels back like a thin membrane, and he senses depth again, the same vertiginous inward distance he felt on the lower decks during the first voyage. This time, it is sharper, more focused. The whispers do not murmur. They converge. He smells iron and old incense. He feels eyes upon him, not countless and unfocused, but singular and intent. The hunger inside him surges, not demanding but welcoming, and in that instant, he understands the true function of partial failure. The warp does not need to break the ship open. It only needs to reach inside those it has already begun to unmake. Then the field stabilizes. The hum smooths out. The membrane snaps back into place. The universe pretends nothing happened. Marius collapses against a bulkhead, gasping, heart slamming against his ribs. Around him, crew members carry on, oblivious or willfully blind. Somewhere on the bridge, a tech priest notes a minor fluctuation in the logs and marks it for later review. No one will connect that data point to the way Marius's hands shake, or to the quiet certainty settling into his mind. The warp has crossed a threshold with him. It has confirmed something. The next time the field thins, it will not be testing. It will be editing. After the fluctuation, the ship feels like a throat held too tightly. Air moves, but not freely. Voices carry, but not cleanly. Even the incense in the chapel burns with a strange reluctance, its smoke curling downward before it rises, as though gravity is briefly uncertain. Marius moves through his duties with the careful focus of a man walking along a ledge in the dark. He watches his own reactions like an enemy would, measuring every spike of fear, every surge of anger, knowing each one is a flare in a place that notices flares. People begin to vanish into routine excuses. A ratings boy is reassigned to the aft decks and never seen again, his bunk stripped and his name quietly removed from the duty rota. A Medicaid attendant is moved to isolation after reporting a shared dream phenomenon. The official language is always soft, always clinical, but the fear underneath is raw. The crew have begun to understand that the warp's danger is not only external. It is internal, creeping into the cracks of perception and rewriting what a person thinks is theirs. Marius experiences the editing first as absence. He tries to recall the face of the man from the loading dock, an image that has haunted him for years, and finds, to his surprise, that the memory has blurred. Not softened, removed. The corners are gone. The details stripped away until all that remains is a sense of guilt without an anchor. He stares at the blankness in his mind and feels a wave of nausea. That memory was a wound, but it was his. Now it feels as though someone has taken a blade to it and reshaped it into something cleaner, more useful. In the following hours, other gaps emerge. A prayer he has recited since childhood suddenly stalls on his tongue, one line missing as if it never existed. A corridor he has walked 100 times seems slightly altered, not in architecture but in his certainty of it. He pauses at a junction and cannot remember which path leads to the mess and which leads to the chapel. The realization is small, but it lands like a hammer. He is not lost in the ship. He is lost in himself. The whisper returns in fragments, not as words but as impulses. Turn left, don't speak. Look at him. When Marius resists, the pressure behind his eyes intensifies until it becomes pain. When he obeys, the pressure eases, and the hunger inside him settles with quiet satisfaction. This is not possession in the dramatic sense. It is conditioning. The warp is shaping behavior the way water shapes stone patiently, invisibly through repetition. He sees the same process in others. An armsman named Jorik, broad-shouldered and ordinarily steady, begins to repeat phrases under his breath during patrols, tiny scraps of high Gothic that do not match any known litany. When questioned, Jorik laughs awkwardly and claims it's superstition, something his father used to say. But Marius watches his eyes when he speaks, the way they unfocus for a fraction of a second, as if listening to something else. The next day, Jorik strikes a crewman without provocation, his fist connecting with a wet crack. He stands over the man, trembling, and whispers a single word Marius cannot hear. Later, Jorik will claim he doesn't remember doing it. The officers will file it as stress. The warp will file it as progress. The second fluctuation happens near the end of a watch cycle. It is even smaller than the first, so brief the ship's instruments barely catch it. Yet for those who are already marked, it is unmistakable. Marius feels the hum thin again, feels reality soften at the edges. This time, there is no vertigo. Instead, there is clarity so intense it is almost holy. For a heartbeat, he sees the ship as a structure of layered meanings rather than metal and rivets wards carved into beams. prayers embedded in circuitry, the Gellar Field not as a machine but as a boundary drawn by faith and will. And beyond that boundary, he senses something vast, coiled, attentive. Like a living ocean pressed against glass. In that instant, the whisper becomes a voice. Not in low Gothic. Not in any human language. It is sound shaped into intention, meaning forced into the narrow channel of a mind that cannot fully contain it. Marius understands without understanding, the way one understands the direction of a storm by the way the air changes. The message is not a command. It is an assessment. Almost. The field stabilizes. The chapel candles steady. The corridor returns to its ordinary proportions. The clarity collapses, leaving Marius shaking, tears stinging his eyes for no reason he can name. He tastes salt and copper. He realizes he has bitten his tongue hard enough to bleed. He knows then that the warp's hunger is not simply feeding on emotion. It is sorting, selecting what it wants to keep and what it wants to discard. Fear, guilt, anger, these are tools, chisels used to carve the soul into a shape that fits. And the most terrifying part is that the process does not require a catastrophic breach. It happens in the margins, in fluctuations too small to trigger alarms. In edits too subtle for Medicae scans to detect. By the time the ship's officers finally acknowledge that something is wrong, it is not because they have seen demons. It is because discipline is fraying in ways they cannot punish into compliance. Crewmen stare too long at nothing. Servitors respond to commands with a fraction of delay, as if listening elsewhere. The astropath refuses to transmit, claiming the void itself is crowded. A tech priest on the bridge quietly requests additional wards and is denied. Because the ship's schedule cannot tolerate delays. That is the Imperium's great vulnerability. It treats the warp as a hazard to be managed, a storm to be endured. It cannot afford to treat it as an intelligence that studies its methods and adapts. The Gellar Field was built to hold back intrusion, not to prevent influence. It keeps claws out. It does not keep whispers from sinking in. Marius stands alone in a maintenance passage and realizes something with cold certainty. He is still himself in all the ways that matter to the Imperium. He can work. He can obey. He can recite prayers and pass inspections. But the person he was before the first voyage is becoming a memory with missing pieces. The warp is not taking him. It is changing what him means. And somewhere in the ship's sealed sanctums, the officers receive a new warning from the astropath's chamber. A message scratched into parchment and sealed with trembling wax. Because the astropath will not trust the Vox. The route ahead is unstable. The Immaterium is restless. The next jump will be longer than planned. Marius reads the warning over a superior's shoulder and feels the hunger inside him stir with something that might be joy. The Imperium has never lacked for explanations. When something cannot be understood, it is classified. When it cannot be classified, it is sanctified or destroyed. Marius learns this not from doctrine, but from the way the ship's hierarchy subtly reorganizes itself after the astropath's warning. The tone shifts. Orders arrive wrapped in prayer. Authority tightens its grip, not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of an institution that knows exactly how much fear it can afford to acknowledge. Those who show obvious signs are dealt with first. A ratings clerk who speaks in fragmented High Gothic during sleep is removed under guard and never returns. An armsman whose eyes have begun to glow faintly in low light is reassigned to a sealed compartment for observation. No one asks what observation entails. The Imperium prefers clean categories, and anyone who threatens to blur them becomes a liability. These are not trials. There are no accusations, no chances for defense. The judgment is purely functional. Does the individual still serve? Can the change be directed? Or is it safer to excise the problem entirely? Marius watches all of this with the detached awareness of someone who knows he is being evaluated as well. He has learned how to hide the signs. He flattens his emotions, keeps his voice steady, his gaze respectful but unremarkable. He recites litanies at the proper cadence and never adds his own emphasis. The hunger inside him resents this restraint, but it does not rebel. It waits. He begins to understand dimly that control is not resistance. It is camouflage. The chapel becomes a focal point. Attendance increases, not out of devotion but out of fear, and fear has a gravity of its own. The priest assigned to the Vigilant Oath delivers sermons that walk a careful line, emphasizing endurance over purity, survival over righteousness. He speaks of saints who endured impossible trials, of martyrs who emerged transformed by their suffering. The words settle uneasily in the minds of the crew, offering hope and threat in equal measure. Transformation, after all, can be framed as blessing if it serves the Emperor's will. Marius feels the weight of those words acutely. During prayer, when the air is thick with incense and the low murmur of voices blends into something almost musical, he senses the hunger coil tighter, attentive. It does not recoil from the aquila or the litanies. It listens. It learns the rhythms of devotion the same way it learned the rhythms of fear. For the first time, a truly horrifying thought takes root in his mind. What if faith itself is not a shield, but a language? What if the warp does not always oppose the Imperium's rituals, but waits for the right ones to open the wrong doors? Rumors circulate, half liturgical, half hysterical. Navigators, it is said, are not merely born with the gift of sight, but shaped by generations of controlled exposure, their bloodlines honed by proximity to the Immaterium. Astropaths whisper that the Emperor's light does not erase the warp's touch, but channels it, forcing it into forms that can be endured. None of this is official doctrine. All of it is dangerous to voice. And yet, Marius hears fragments of these ideas in muttered conversations, in the way veterans glance at those who have returned changed, and wonder whether they are cursed or chosen. The ship's command staff begin to test boundaries. Not openly, not with experimentation that could be named as such, but with subtle shifts in assignment. Marius is placed on longer watches in more isolated sections of the ship. He is asked casually whether he has noticed anything unusual since the last jump. The question is framed as concern, but he hears the calculation beneath it. He answers carefully, offering nothing that could not be attributed to ordinary stress. The hunger inside him hums, amused. He realizes then that the Imperium does not fear the warp touched as much as it fears unpredictability. A man who screams and claws at unseen horrors is easy to condemn. A man who changes quietly, who functions better than before, who anticipates danger and reacts with uncanny precision is more complicated. Such a man can be a problem or a resource. The line between saint and witch is thin, and it is drawn by utility rather than truth. One cycle. As the Vigilant Oath drifts in the void awaiting clearance for the next jump, Marius is summoned to a sealed chamber near the bridge. The walls are inscribed with wards, their symbols etched deep and fresh. The air smells of ozone and sanctified oil. A junior officer waits for him, flanked by an armsman whose grip on his weapon is tight enough to whiten his knuckles. The officer's expression is neutral, but his eyes are sharp. He asks Marius to describe what he felt during the last fluctuation. Marius hesitates for exactly one heartbeat too long. In that pause he feels the hunger stir, alert and curious. He understands with brutal clarity that this moment matters. What he says next will decide which category he falls into. Asset, liability, something worse. He chooses his words with care, offering fragments of truth wrapped in banality, stress, disorientation, nothing that interfered with duty. nothing that could not be endured with prayer and discipline. The officer listens without interruption, then nods once, slowly. The armsman relaxes a fraction. The meeting ends without ceremony. As Marius leaves the chamber, he feels a chill that has nothing to do with recycled air. He has passed an invisible test, but he does not know what that means. Only that he has been noticed, labeled, considered. Behind sealed doors and in whispered prayers, the Imperium debates what to do with those who return from the warp altered but intact. Some will be burned. Some will be bound. And some, if they are useful enough, will be allowed to continue, walking a narrow path between damnation and service, celebrated as saints or condemned as monsters depending on how well they obey. Marius walks back to his post with measured steps, the hum of the ship vibrating through his bones. The hunger inside him is quiet now, watchful. It understands institutions. It understands selection, and it understands that the next jump will decide far more than whether the ship survives. The longer the Vigilant Oath lingers at the edge of its next translation, the more the crew begin to behave like prisoners waiting for a verdict. They talk less. They watch one another more. In the mess, conversations die when a new face enters. In the corridors, people step aside too quickly, as if proximity itself might invite scrutiny. Marius feels the ship tightening around its own fear, turning that fear into order. That is what the Imperium does best. It takes panic and gives it structure, then calls the structure virtue. The chaplain, if the priest can be called that in a voidship, where roles blur, begins holding longer services. Candles burn until their wax pools thick on the deck plates. The same hymns are repeated until their words lose meaning and become pure sound. Marius attends because attendance is noticed. He kneels because kneeling is safe. Around him, the crew whisper prayers with lips that barely move, eyes fixed on the imperial aquila looming above the altar. Their devotion is desperate, and Marius can feel how that desperation vibrates through the air like heat. The hunger listens. It is not blasphemous in the way the ecclesiarchy teaches you to fear. It does not hiss at the emperor's name or recoil from sacred symbols. It absorbs. It learns the cadence of litanies, the shape of reverence, the way hope tastes when it is offered under duress. Marius finds himself wondering, with a cold, sick clarity, whether some of the old stories about saints were simply accounts of survivors, men and women who returned from the warp changed, and were given a holy frame to make them tolerable. It is an in-world thought, the kind that could get a man shot if voiced aloud, and it comes with a sharp pang of guilt that the hunger drinks down like water. After the service, the priest approaches him. The man's face is drawn, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes rimmed red as though he rarely sleeps. His voice is gentle, almost fatherly, but there is an edge to it that Marius recognizes, the edge of someone who has been told to look for signs. "You've been steady," the priest says, as if steadiness is a sacrament. "That is a blessing." Marius nods and keeps his expression blank. He has learned that gratitude can be dangerous. Too much feeling is a signal. The priest's gaze lingers. "Do you dream?" The question is simple, framed as pastoral concern, but Marius hears what it really is. An assessment. A probe. "I sleep," Marius answers. "I pray." The priest studies him for another beat, then makes the sign of the aquila over his chest. The gesture is quick, practiced. "Hold to the emperor." The warp feeds on weakness. Marius bows his head, and for a moment the hunger inside him curls tighter, not offended, but amused. As if it enjoys being spoken about in the third person, like a guest eavesdropping from behind a curtain. That night, the dreams change again. They become less symbolic and more specific, as if the warp has grown impatient with metaphors. Marius dreams of the Vigilant Oath's corridors, but they are stretched, elongated, their angles subtly wrong. He dreams of the sealed chamber near the bridge, its warded walls pulsing faintly as though the symbols are alive. He dreams of the officer who questioned him, and in the dream the officer's mouth opens to speak, but the voice that comes out is the same layered murmur Marius first heard in the Immaterium. It calls him by name and then shows him something he cannot fully describe when he wakes. A vast shape moving through an ocean of darkness, turning slightly as if it has sensed a familiar scent. When he wakes, he finds dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He does not remember biting himself. His hands are clenched so tightly his knuckles ache. In the cycles that follow, command begins making quiet preparations. Armsmen are issued additional promethium canisters and told it is for fire safety. Tech priests perform more rites over the Gellar Field projectors, chanting binaric hymns while oils are applied in precise patterns. The astropath remains sealed away, and no one speaks of what state he is in, only that he has refused to open his chamber door. An unspoken assumption spreads. If the astropath will not look out into the Immaterium, then whatever he sees there must be worse than usual. Marius is assigned to a work detail near the Gellar Field access conduits. It is mundane labor checking seals, hauling cabling, assisting tech adepts, but the location itself feels like standing next to a wall holding back a flood. The hum is stronger here, vibrating through his teeth, and the hunger inside him becomes restless. It is drawn toward the source, toward the boundary. He catches himself staring at the conduits as if he expects them to breathe. A tech adept notices. Her face is mostly hidden behind a respirator and a veil of mechadendrites, but her organic eyes are visible, pale and unblinking. She watches Marius for a long moment. "You have been through this before," she says, voice distorted by her vox filter. "Yes," Marius replies. "Did you feel it change you?" Her tone is neutral, but there is hunger in her too, an intellectual hunger, sharp and dangerous. Curiosity is another form of appetite, and in the Imperium it can be as fatal as heresy. Marius chooses his answer carefully. It changes everyone. The tech adept holds his gaze. For a heartbeat, Marius thinks she will press further. Then she inclines her head and returns to her work, mechadendrites clicking softly as they trace warding symbols along the conduit's surface. Marius watches, and the hunger inside him stirs as if recognizing another kind of ritual. Not prayer, not faith, but the mechanicus' precise devotion to machine and method. The warp does not care what language you use, he thinks. It cares that you speak. When the order finally comes, prepare for translation, the announcement moves through the ship like a cold wind. The crew respond with practiced obedience, but beneath it Marius feels the tremor of collective dread. The ship is about to step back into the place that unmakes people, and this time everyone knows it. The ignorance that softened the first voyage is gone. In its place is the sharp, bitter understanding that survival does not mean untouched. Marius takes his assigned position near the conduits and braces himself, hands gripping the rail until his fingers numb. He hears the litanies begin again over the vox grills, voices layered with static and strain. He feels the Gellar Field hum swell, that bone-deep vibration rising into a steady, familiar barrier. And then, just before the stars vanish, he feels the hunger inside him flare, not with fear, not with pain, but with a quiet, anticipatory joy that scares him more than any scream, because he realizes, in that last thin moment of real space, that part of him wants this. Not consciously, not as a choice he would admit, but as an alignment the warp has been patiently cultivating. The boundary forms. The ship slips into absence, and somewhere beyond the membrane, something vast turns toward them, as if it has been waiting all along for a familiar name to return. The third translation feels different from the moment it begins. Not because of violence or instability, but because of inevitability. The Vigilant Oath does not lurch or shudder as it enters the warp. It slides, smoothly and efficiently, like a blade guided into a familiar sheath. The Gellar Field hums with unusual steadiness, its vibration even and confident, and for the first time since his service began, Marius feels no spike of panic at the transition. The absence closes around the ship, and instead of bracing against it, something inside him relaxes. That realization terrifies him more than any fluctuation ever did. He forces his breathing into slow, disciplined rhythms, focusing on the texture of the rail beneath his hands, the chill of metal against his palms. Around him, the conduits glow faintly with ward light as tech adepts murmur binaric prayers. The ship's systems report nominal performance across all decks. On the bridge, officers exchange cautious looks but issue no alarms. To the Imperium, this is a successful jump already in progress. Inside Marius, the hunger settles like a held breath finally released. It does not speak at first. It does not need to. Its presence fills the spaces where fear used to live, smoothing them down, replacing resistance with something like purpose. He becomes aware of a strange clarity, not the harsh, over-sharpened perception of earlier voyages, but a deeper sense of orientation. He knows where he is in the ship without thinking. He knows when someone is about to speak, when a system is about to fail, when a crewman's composure is about to crack. The warp is not overwhelming him. It is aligning him. This is how the unmaking finishes, he realizes. Not with destruction, but with integration. The whispers return, but they are no longer whispers. They are impressions, intuitions arriving fully formed, bypassing language entirely. He understands without hearing that the Immaterium is not a place of pure malice, as imperial doctrine simplifies it, nor a realm of infinite madness, as heretics claim. It is a reflection magnified and unbound, shaped by thought, fed by emotion, structured by belief. It does not kill indiscriminately. It selects. It refines. The realization does not come as a revelation from beyond. It feels like a memory surfacing, something he has always known but never been able to articulate. That frightens him more than the idea itself. He has not been taught this. He has been brought to it. Across the ship, others are not so fortunate. A scream echoes faintly through the conduits, cut short almost immediately. Somewhere, an armsman loses control and is restrained with brutal efficiency. A ratings boy collapses into convulsions, his body rejecting what his mind cannot reconcile. The Imperium's methods activate smoothly, containment protocols snapping into place. Fire teams move. Doors seal. Names are removed from rosters. The machine of survival grinds on. Marius feels each incident like a pressure change, not as empathy, but as data. Fear spikes. Pain flares. Faith surges. The warp drinks it all, and in return it sharpens him further. He understands then why some who return from the warp are declared saints and others are burned as witches. It is not morality that decides their fate. It is compatibility. The thought is dangerous, heretical, and utterly convincing. He remembers fragments of rumor overheard in hushed tones, that certain imperial saints could stand in places where reality thinned without flinching. That some navigators see not just paths through the warp but patterns within it. That the Emperor himself endures the Immaterium not by resisting it, but by mastering it. Marius does not know if these things are true. He only knows that the warp responds to will shaped by belief, and belief reinforced by repetition becomes structure. The Gellar Field does not weaken this time. It holds perfectly. And yet, the warp reaches Marius anyway, not through breach, but through resonance. He feels something vast turn its attention fully upon him, not with hunger now, but with assessment sharpened to a blade's edge. He senses no demand, no command. Only a silent question, vast and patient. What are you becoming? For the first time, Marius does not immediately recoil from the question. He thinks of the man he was before the first jump, defined by routine, fear, and a narrow understanding of survival. He thinks of the pieces of himself that have been stripped away, memories softened, instincts reshaped, reactions tuned. He thinks of what remains: discipline, awareness, the ability to endure what breaks others. The Imperium would call this corruption if it named it at all. The warp seems to call it refinement. The ship sails on through impossible currents, its wards blazing, its prayers unbroken. To the bridge, everything appears under control. To the logs, the voyage will be exemplary. But deep within the vessel, Marius feels a final, quiet shift, like a door closing behind him without ceremony. He understands now that there will be no return to who he was. The warp does not give things back unchanged. It takes what is offered, reshapes it, and leaves the result to walk the galaxy wearing a familiar face. And in that understanding, he feels something that horrifies him with its sincerity. Gratitude. When the Vigilant Oath emerges into real space for the final time, the transition is so clean it feels unreal. Stars bloom back into existence with surgical precision. The hum of the Gellar Field fades, leaving behind a silence that rings in Marius's ears like the aftershock of a loud noise. There is no lurch, no cry of alarm, no sudden chaos. The ship settles into its assigned vector as if nothing extraordinary has occurred. Cheers break out on several decks. Not wild celebrations, but the subdued release of pressure held too long. Men and women embrace briefly, then pull away, embarrassed by the display. Prayers of thanks ripple through the vox grills, layered and fervent. The Imperium loves moments like this. Moments where survival can be framed as validation, where endurance can be mistaken for purity. Marius stands at his station, and feels the absence of the warp like the loss of a limb. The hunger is quiet now, not gone, but folded inward, dormant rather than erased. He does not feel diminished by its retreat. He feels complete in a way he cannot explain. The alignment remains, a subtle internal geometry that real space does not undo. Inspections follow. They always do. Medicae scans, purity checks, ritual questioning conducted by officers who recite doctrine with practiced ease. Marius answers every query correctly. His vitals are within acceptable parameters. His faith registers as stable. There are no visible mutations, no psychic flares, no overt signs of taint. He is cleared with a stamped data slate and a curt nod. Others are not. He watches as sealed. Doors claim those who failed to integrate. A ratings boy is led away, trembling, his eyes unfocused. An armsman who laughed too often during the voyage is executed quietly in a maintenance bay, his body fed to the recyclers without ceremony. A tech adept is transferred under heavy guard, destination redacted. The Imperium does not mourn inefficiency. It catalogs it. Marius feels no triumph at surviving where others did not. He feels understanding. The warp did not choose them, or they did not fit what it chose to make. Either way, the outcome is the same. This is not cruelty in the human sense. It is process. He is reassigned within the week. The order comes stamped with sigils he does not recognize, routed through channels that bypass ordinary command. He is to remain aboard the Vigilant Oath for now, his experience deemed operationally valuable. He is to be observed not as a suspect, but as a reference. The phrasing is careful, bloodless, useful. On his last evening before the ship makes port, Marius stands alone near a viewport, watching a distant star burn with indifferent brilliance. He remembers dimly that he once feared the warp as a place that devoured people. Now he understands it as something far more unsettling. It does not erase. It transforms. It takes the raw material of humanity and subjects it to pressures the Imperium barely understands, then sends the results back into service. He wonders how many others walk the galaxy like him, altered but intact, carrying internal alignments that will never be logged or acknowledged. Veterans who never quite meet your eyes. Officers whose instincts are uncannily precise. Saints whose miracles defy easy explanation. Monsters who obey until they no longer do. None of this will be written into official histories. The Imperium cannot afford such honesty. It will continue to teach that the warp is a hazard to be shielded against, a storm to be endured. It will continue to burn those who fail and sanctify those who succeed, never admitting that success may itself be a form of surrender. As the Vigilant Oath prepares to dock, Marius feels the hunger stir faintly, not with need, but with recognition, like a scar that aches when the weather changes. He knows now that it will never truly leave him. The warp does not need constant contact. It leaves marks deep enough to last a lifetime. He makes the sign of the Aquila over his chest, the motion smooth and sincere. He believes in the Emperor. He also understands the warp in a way he did not before. The two truths coexist inside him without friction, layered rather than opposed. That is the final lie the Imperium tells its people, that survival means remaining unchanged. Marius steps away from the viewport as docking clamps engage with a heavy, resonant thud. The journey is over. His service continues, and somewhere beyond the skin of reality, the warp remembers him, not as prey or victim, but as something finished, something shaped, something sent back into the galaxy to do whatever it was made to do. The warp does not kill you. It unmade you carefully, and then it let you go.